In a module titled A Bumpy World of Change and Its Basic Dynamics, our distinguished invited speaker, Dr. Peter Andersen, will present a revealing and valuable overview of the unequal and bimodal world we face today in relation to access to technology, a very non-flat economic playing field, religious divisions, environmental uncertainties, and health disparities, among other critical dynamics that characterizes our new reality of change and surprises calling for renewed commitment to creativity and innovation. In another module titled Re-Invention and Change for Global Success, Dr. Andersen will propose specific actions and solutions that educational institutions, businesses, and governments must implement to respond to these contemporary crises and disparities, including focusing on our core competencies and strengths, democratization, sustainability, empowering women, and innovation through a 5-plan adaptation process. Our distinguished invited speaker, Dr. Peter Andersen, is professor of communication at San Diego State University. He has authored over 150 book chapters, research papers, and journal articles, as well as 7 books. He has received recognition as one of the 100 most published scholars in the history of the field of communication. His 3 most recent books are Nonverbal Communication, Forms and Functions, published in 2008, Close Encounters, Communication in Relationships, published in 2007, and The Complete Idiot's Guide to Body Language, published in 2004. Dr. Andersen has recently published papers on communication and emotion, nonverbal communication, interpersonal relationships, risk communication, skin cancer communication, homeland security, and communication and technology. Dr. Andersen has served as the president of Western Communication Association, editor of the Western Journal of Communication, and director of research for the Japan-U.S. Telecommunications Research Institute. He is a consultant for the United States Center for Disease Control. Welcome to the program today. Let's begin with Module 1 of our program.
There is no question that we live in a world of constant change where development, achievement, and success are greatly uneven processes that are constantly evolving and mandating creativity and innovation. These dynamics will not go away. We must learn to evolve and adapt with them. In recent years, it has become commonplace to speak of globalization, internationalization, and borderless nations. Without a doubt, during the last century, global trade, tourism, and cultural exchange has increased substantially and continuously. But is the world now composed of one global economy? Is there a unitary global playing field where all the players are essentially equal? Are disparities declining across the world? Are poor nations catching up with the most developed countries? Is change and innovation occurring worldwide? Has the economic downturn affected countries equally? Some commentators say that a level playing field exists across the planet and that everyone is playing in the same game with similar rules. For example, commentator Thomas Friedman maintains that from an economic and technological standpoint, the world is flat. Friedman maintains that a number of forces have conspired to level the world playing field, including the fall of communism 2 decades ago, distribution of computer software worldwide, global outsourcing, international supply chains, and globalized markets. In reality, like the navigators of the 15th century, Friedman's declaration that the world is flat may not comport with reality. As Paul Krugman has maintained, the world is still a very lumpy place. The metaphor of a flat planet with a level playing field for all nations and businesses ignores the lumps and bumps, the many peaks and valleys that characterize all aspects of human societies. As cultural geographer Harm de Blige says, the Earth, physically as well as culturally, is still very rough terrain, and in crucial ways, its compartments continue to trap billions in circumstances that spell disadvantage. Economically, educationally, politically, environmentally, religiously, and medically, vast disparities still exist on Earth. The world is very bumpy. How does a person cope with this bumpy international terrain in an era of global flattening? First, it is important to understand and recognize the global terrain in time and space. Friedman is not entirely wrong. Across the planet, in every nation, a new class of internationals has emerged that are mobile, affluent, information-rich. The internationals are particularly prevalent in North America, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and Eastern Asia, including Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, South Korea, and Hong Kong. Indeed, an affluent international information elite exists in every country and is rapidly expanding in places like India, Brazil, Chile, Venezuela, and Mexico. The grand innovations that are second nature to these internationals are not a fact of life for billions of people on the planet. The grand information innovations of the elite internationals, including the internet, 3G phones, cable, new weather radar, Facebook, Twitters, 24-hour stock markets, air-conditioned hotels, and international transportation and jet aircraft, are not within the reach of the majority of the planet's citizens. Indeed, most of the planet's people are not even aware of these innovations. Not so with the information elite, who experience emotional meltdowns if they can't get their email, their cell phone battery is low, or their airplane is 2 hours late. We live in a bimodal world where the majority cannot even dream about what the information elite treats as their birthright. In a world where many of us routinely make international phone calls, have third-generation cell phones, do much of their work and correspondence via email, and search the internet daily, it is easy to conclude that the world is flat and technology is ubiquitous. This is particularly true where the government, business, and university elite correspond so easily with the internet with colleagues across the globe. This hides the fact that in many countries, fewer than 10% of the citizens have electricity. Most people on Earth have never made a phone call. In most European and North American countries, broadband internet penetration now exceeds 30% of the population and will shortly become almost ubiquitous. However, in much of the world, less than 1% of the citizens have broadband internet access, and in many countries, it is not available at all. Clearly, these countries do not participate in e-commerce or internet-based education and continue to reside on the wrong side of the digital divide. To understand the world in 2010, three important economic realities should be recognized. First, massive economic disparities exist throughout the world. For most people in countries, the world is not flat economically. Second, we are not in a recession, we are in a global reckoning, a massive recalibration of our collective worth, and an imperative for companies, individuals, institutions, and governments to live within their means. Third, the current economic circumstances have reduced our interdependence and made local relatively more relevant than global. The world is anything but flat economically. Brazil has 9 times the per capita GNP as Haiti, and the United States has 11 times the per capita GDP of Brazil. It is hard to compare the economic circumstances of the richest countries in the hemisphere, such as the United States, Canada, and Brazil, to the hemisphere's poorest countries, such as Haiti, Honduras, and Nicaragua. According to the International Food Policy Research Institute, in 30 countries, such as Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sierra Leone, and the Congo, over a third of their citizens suffer from severe malnutrition or starvation. Even in the Western Hemisphere, several countries experience extreme hunger, including 11% of Hondurans, 12% of Dominicans and Bolivians, and 14% of Guatemalans, Nicaraguans, and 25% of Haitians. This is a reckoning, not a recession. As I have said in other ITC programs, the 2008-2010 global financial crisis was more than a recession. It was actually a long-term global recalibration of the world's economy, which had been spending more money than it actually had. The world's economy had to undergo a massive reconciliation of actual worth versus perceived resources. Individuals, banks, companies, and nations lived beyond their means. Individuals had spent money they did not have and racked up record credit card bills, fueling a consumer-driven world economy that we will have to learn to live with less enthusiastic consumer behavior. In America and across the world, people continued to purchase homes in the teeth of a record housing bubble. Local trumped global activities. The 2008-2010 global economic downturn, the biggest since the Great Depression of the 20th century, drove exports downward by over 10% in each of the 2 years of the crisis, the largest contraction since World War II. For the first time in decades, companies and countries could not rely on exports to jumpstart their economy. From coffee to cars, from microchips to motors, from tomatoes to textiles, world exports continued to slump. Worse, the price of exported goods fell, further reducing the benefits of reduced export trade. The reduction was global, but Asia, which had for decades experienced a trade surplus, was hardest hit. The European economic downturn meant that another huge market was on the sideline, further reducing the available market for exports. Increasingly, countries looked to local markets for their business as global markets declined. A word on global religious divisions. Religion is the most deeply personal issue conceivably. Tolerance and protection of religious beliefs, of individuals and groups is crucial. Instead of a flat world where people celebrate and accept one another's religious belief, the world is becoming increasingly more religiously balkanized and intolerant. Religious fundamentalists threaten religious freedom, cultural cooperation, and even world peace. Whether Muslim, Hindu, Jewish, or Christian, religious fundamentalists teach that other religions are evil, and there is only one way to salvation, and in the most extreme cases, the infidels, sinners, or non-believers should be killed. Instead of this being an era of enlightenment and tolerance of these diverse beliefs, in much of the world, forces of fundamentalism and intolerance are spreading. A smooth, flat, religious world is a distant dream. In reality, the religious map is increasingly lumpy, inflammatory, intolerant, and violent. Careless human exploitation of the planet's resources has left us on the brink of continuous ecological disasters. Global climate change caused by excess greenhouse gases threatens our huge populations on the world's seacoast with inundation. spreads dangerous insects to new ecosystems, and creates superstorms with increased ferocity. Our reckless use of fossil fuels has exacerbated this crisis, but also devastated our oceans, as the recent blowout in the Gulf of Mexico has illustrated. The wreckage of vast tracts of land across the world from mining and mineral extraction is a similar catastrophe. These disasters are the fault of no one person. They are the result of diffuse, heartless organizations, businesses, and governments with a profit-at-all-cost mentality without regard for the terrestrial, oceanic, or human carnage. Worse, the greatest burden of the environmental crisis falls on the poorest and least connected of the world's people. Sure, BP and Goldman Sachs stockholders have suffered as a consequence of environmental and financial disasters. But the real burden of these disasters falls on the poorest world citizens. The thousands that died from the chemical spill in Bhopal, India, the poorest of the residents on Indonesia or Bangladesh that risk drowning from rising sea levels, the poorest residents of Latin America who risk poisoning from searching toxic dumps for food or furniture, the poorest, least educated of New Orleans who bore the brunt of Katrina's wrath are far more at risk. These are the worst victims of ecologies gone awry. While the world's poorest people are the canaries in the coal mine, a deteriorating global environment is a threat to all of us, including the information elite internationalists. Clearly, reinvention, innovation, and sustainability are necessary to address potential perils. For many of the world's citizens, health has improved dramatically in the last decade. The global elite with access to inoculations, clean drinking water, waste disposal systems, quality nutrition, modern health care, and the latest in medications have raised life expectancy and quality of life dramatically in the last century. But all of these innovations are beyond the reach of most of the world's people, for whom the playing field is not level and the world is definitely not flat. In South Asia, parts of Latin America, and most of sub-Saharan Africa, none of the aforementioned health innovations are available. Millions of these people suffer from HIV/AIDS, malaria, tuberculosis, dengue fever, malnutrition, and a short and often miserable life. Worse, the high birth rate in the very countries with the worst health conditions condemn millions of children alive today and unborn to the ravages of these diseases. Of course, the economic elites suffer their own maladies, such as the diseases of affluenza, high blood pressure, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, gout, and many others associated with tobacco smoking. These are serious diseases, but inflict far less suffering and death than the diseases people of the world's poorest lands suffer. Anyone who thinks that the world is flat and level in terms of health knows little about the awful conditions in most of sub-Saharan Africa, in many parts of the Caribbean, in several countries of Central America, a number of countries of South Asia, or the poorest countries of South America. In the worst of these countries, average life expectancy is less than 30 years, and in a number of other countries, life expectancy is less than 40 years. In the period 2008 to 2010, every country in the world suffered an economic slowdown. But the impact of slowdown fell unequally on various world sectors. Within Latin America, the global economic slowdown affected Mexico and Central America the hardest. Most of the slowdown was caused by a decrease in external demand for Latin American products. South America was impacted, but to a lesser degree. Although Brazil is a growing global economic power and recovered somewhat rapidly from the global economic slump, Brazil also has one of the largest economic disparities in the world. While some Brazilians have maintained and even increased their affluence, the downturn fell hardest on the Brazilian underclasses. Eventually, such disparities lay the foundation for crime, terrorism, revolution, and economic stagnation. It is not enough for the most affluent to do well and to play successfully in the flat global economy. Underclasses are a drag on economy and a danger to themselves and to the upper classes. How do businesses, educational institutions, and governments respond to these crises and disparities? It would be presumptuous for me to suggest definitive solutions to these crises of our unequal and bimodal world. Nonetheless, I can assure you that the key is creativity, innovation, and reinvention. How to do this depends on the scenario and realities that each of us face. In another module, I would like to brainstorm some processes and examples that may help you to begin to find solutions to these disparities in your own countries and cultures. Technology-based human networks will be increasingly the facilitators for implementing these solutions urgently needed in our bumpy world today. Let's evolve and adapt to our new global realities. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Let's now go to Module 2 of our program.
In a world with massive inequities, a huge economic slump, political upheavals, and religious strife, what is an individual and organization to do? Clearly, individuals and institutions are not helpless to address these problems. Rather than being passive or fatalistic, we need to begin to seek change that addresses these problems. As individuals and organizations, we can and must reinvent ourselves, seek new innovations, and create sustainable organizations and environments. It is imperative that individuals and organizations seek to examine their successes and failures and seek to reinvent themselves. They must use intuition and foresight and make calculated risks to advance and evolve. They must educate and train decision makers in the effective use of these techniques. Organizations that fail to change with shifting markets, generations, and economic circumstances are destined to fail. Reinvention is a process by which an individual or an organization attempts to examine current inefficiencies, discover new opportunities and missions, and create beneficial change. Reinvention requires creative thinking and re-examination of your current individual or organizational practices. Inertia and calcification are great threats to individual and organizational well-being. In an effort to stimulate your thinking about reinvention in this module, we will discuss a series of ways you and your organization can rethink what you're currently doing. Let's first look toward our core competencies. Companies should identify what is central, peripheral, and completely outside their capacities. Organizations should critically analyze what they are really good at, or what they can possibly do, and what is outside of their potential. Building on core competencies is a key to a productive forward path. Most individuals and companies know what they do best, and these core competencies should provide the stable center for your career or company. Consider the micro-investment option. In many countries, the poorest citizens can be helped with small investments of cash to jumpstart their businesses. What might be a trivial amount of money to your organization can be the lifeblood of a small business. Given the great disparities, micro-investments can be both socially responsible and a good investment for your organization. Rather than just giving to charity, which promotes dependence, investing in a small organization promotes independence. Successful businesses eventually have a multiplier effect on the local economy and produce more consumers for local businesses. Even if a micro-investment only yields a 2% profit, your organization will have 102% more money to reinvest in another enterprise than if the money was donated to charity. Have you or your organization ever considered micro-investment? Let's now comment on the benefits of democratization. Democracy is not easily adaptable to every culture or political system. Some countries lack any history of democratic values, have no experience with elections, have no traditions of free speech, and no respect for the civil equality of each person. Thus, the seeds of democratic tradition does not thrive equally well in the soil of all countries. Nonetheless, where the seeds of democracy can sprout, economies tend to thrive. In democracies, more citizens of both sexes and all economic classes have greater access to education. Education is the great engine of personal and economic growth. Education produces human capital, and human capital is a leading prerequisite to economic growth. So here are some questions that you or your organization need to answer. Are educational opportunities available to all people in your community and country? Can the most talented people in your community and country continue their education? What steps can be taken to improve your schools and maximize the potential of every citizen? Beyond education, other factors enable countries and their people to thrive economically in democracies. Oppression stifles innovation and reinvention. Freedom of expression, investment, and opportunity liberates the creative energies of your people. If opportunity is limited to a single social class or ethnic group, a country will stagnate, for the creative energies of each person will not be maximized. Statistically, throughout the world, democracies have much higher gross domestic products than dictatorships. In the Americas, there are several examples of the benefits of transitions to democracy. For example, Chile's movement from dictatorship to democracy has fostered considerable economic growth and innovation. Likewise, Costa Rica is a country that has benefited from considerable economic and political democracy. It is the oldest democracy in Latin America and one of the most prosperous. It is near the top in the Human Development Index and in environmental protection. The strong position of Costa Rica has attracted international investment and tourism, further increasing its prosperity. According to the New Economic Foundation, Costa Rica ranks first as an index of human well-being and environmental protection. Much can be learned by every American country from the experiences of Costa Rica. Have you studied what is going on right in Costa Rica? Research suggests that center-left democratic governments foster the most economic growth for the most people. Much of the hemisphere is still deciding the most appropriate economic and democratic model for their country. So here are some questions to ask about your community and your country. Is your labor market free to change jobs and move to new areas of economic growth? Can all of your citizens open a small business with an equal chance of survival? Are job opportunities available in the private and public sector for all your citizens? If not, what can you or your institution do to open up great opportunity for all your citizens? We must all seek sustainability. As I discussed in another ITC program, sustainability means both ongoing economic and environmental protection. The buzzword of the next decade, indeed the 21st century, will be sustainability. According to business consultant Greg Andreotti, the triple bottom line of sustainability is comprised of financial profitability, ecological integrity, and social equity. In short, sustainable organizations must care about profits, the people, and the planet. Throughout the world, most businesses fail. So the first task of any organization is to be economically sustainable. Second, companies have a duty to be ecologically sustainable, to leave the environment in better shape than they found it. Otherwise, an organization is jeopardizing the health and very lives of future sustainability. Finally, individuals and organizations must exercise social responsibility. Organizations and individuals have a responsibility to collaborate, to share their wealth and expertise, and to create more sustainable communities. This is more than a matter of altruism. Uneducated, unemployed, unhealthy people threaten other people and make life more dangerous. People without a future have little to lose and can easily turn to crime, violence, terrorism, or smuggling to seek opportunities they do not have. Socially responsibility societies are safer societies. So ask yourself some of the following questions. In terms of financial sustainability, does your organization have a long-term business plan? Is your debt manageable? Have you focused on your core competencies? In terms of environmental sustainability, does your organization have an energy conservation plan, a LEED certification for your buildings, wind or solar power or other forms of green power generation, a recycling program, flexible work hours, or a water conservation plan? Many of these sustainability innovations can produce savings and profitability for your organization, as well as doing your part to protect the local and global environment. In terms of social responsibility, do you or your organization support charitable giving? Do you collaborate with and support educational organizations? Do you support human rights and public health? Let's insist on empowering women. The wealthiest countries in the world have the most educated women and the highest percentage of women in the workforce. Educated women have educated children, so women are the key to expanding literacy and economic productivity. Women also offer different organizational perspectives and can be a key to organizational innovation. Does your country and company provide equal educational and occupational opportunity for women? Do you encourage women to apply for all positions, including management positions? Do you have a process for the review of sexual harassment charges? Has your company unleashed the power of women in your organization? Buy locally. In the past, we have advocated the benefits of the global marketplace. However, local vendors often have better service, quicker deliveries, less environmental impact, and they can cultivate local relationships in enterprises. Local purchases are more likely to be invested in the local community and help your community and country. Small businesses are the leading employer in most countries and lead to economic diversity, competition, and sustainability. Have you explored local vendors in your home community? To our new global realities. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation.